Fourth quarter, Caitlin Clark goes into the fourth quarter with 26 points and 7 assists. You know what she finished with? 26 points and 7 assists.
Stephanie White just coached Caitlin Clark out of a basketball game. Not the refs alone, not bad luck. Not a hot shooting night from Atlanta. Stephanie White, the head coach of the Indiana Fever, sat her franchise player for the entire crunch time of the fourth quarter, brought her back in with 3 minutes left, and then proceeded to run 0 plays for her. 0. Caitlin Clark stood on that floor like a ghost while the game slipped away, and the woman with the clipboard did absolutely nothing about it. This is not an opinion. This is what happened on the floor in Atlanta, and the people who run this league are not going to say a word about it. Welcome back. This is Rim Run, and today we are documenting the moment Stephanie White and Amber Cox proved they are not equipped to be within 50 feet of Caitlin Clark's career.
Monique Billings was your main attraction for her off-season signing, and she not even playable in the fourth.
I want every single person watching this video to sit with what we are about to lay out, because the full picture of what happened in this loss to the Atlanta Dream is genuinely staggering when you line it all up side by side. This was not a game where the Fever got outclassed by a superior opponent from tip to final buzzer. This was a game where Caitlin Clark was on her way to one of the great individual performances of the WNBA regular season. 26 points, 7 assists, and she was doing it against a Dream defense that had their whole starting lineup in double figures by the end. Clark was carrying this franchise on her back, the way she has carried this franchise from the moment she walked in the door. And the people around her, the coach on the bench, the general manager who assembled this roster, and the officials on the floor, combined to make sure that performance meant absolutely nothing. And I want to be clear about something before we go any further. This video is not an excuse factory. Caitlin Clark went 8 of 12 from the free throw line. That is not good enough. She shot 42% from the stripe in the first quarter, and that is genuinely concerning for a player of her caliber. We are going to address that. But outside of the free throw struggles, Clark played an excellent game. 26 points, 7 assists, 7 rebounds. She was the best player on that floor for 3 quarters. And then Stephanie White made sure that excellence evaporated.
Fourth quarter, Caitlin Clark goes into the fourth quarter with 26 points and 7 assists. You know what she finished with? 26 points and 7 assists.
Let me walk you through exactly what happened, because the sequence of events in this game is the most damning indictment of Stephanie White's coaching that we have seen this season. Caitlin Clark picks up her 5th foul. She has to come out of the game. That is basketball. Fouls happen. What happens next is where Stephanie White's catastrophic failure begins. Clark sits, the fourth quarter plays out. The Fever are in a game they can win. Their best player, their franchise cornerstone, the reason anyone is watching this team, is on the bench, and Stephanie White waits. She waits until there are 3 minutes left in the game Indiana needs to win before she puts Caitlin Clark back on the floor. 3 minutes, that is all she gave her. 3 minutes to try to change the outcome of a game that Clark had been controlling for 3 full quarters. And here is the part that makes it absolutely unconscionable. When Stephanie White finally puts Clark back in, do you think she draws up a single play for her? Do you think she runs one set, one action, one screen and roll, one isolation, one single design touch for the player who had 26 points and 7 assists going into that fourth quarter? No, she did not. Caitlin Clark re-entered that game and was essentially a spectator in a Fever uniform. She barely touched the ball. She did not get a single shot attempt in the fourth quarter. Not one. I want you to understand the weight of that. 26 points and 7 assists entering the fourth quarter. That is a player who is in the zone, who is locked in, who is doing everything right. Any competent head coach in any professional league on this planet sees those numbers and says, I am running everything through this woman for the next 12 minutes. I am drawing up plays to get her the ball. I am making sure the best player on the floor is the center of my offense. That is basketball coaching 101. That is not advanced strategy. That is the most basic, fundamental obligation a head coach has to their roster. Stephanie White did the opposite. She benched Clark at the most critical moment of the game, brought her back too late to matter, and then refused to involve her in the offense when she was out there. And I am not speculating about this. The scoreboard proves it. Don't take my word for it. The numbers are right there on the stat sheet. Listen to what the final line actually looked like.
Monique Billings was your main attraction for her off-season signing, and she not even playable in the fourth.
26 points and 7 assists going in. 26 points and 7 assists coming out. She did not score a single point in the fourth quarter. She did not get a single shot. The numbers did not move. That is the proof. That is what Stephanie White's fourth quarter coaching looked like when her franchise player was on the floor. The scoreboard is the receipt, and it is undeniable. Now let me talk about the ref situation, because this game had two separate disasters happening simultaneously, the coaching failure and the officiating failure. And I refuse to let either one off the hook. Caitlin Clark was being grabbed, held, and fouled throughout this game, and the officials were swallowing their whistles on contact against her while calling phantom fouls in the other direction. I want to be precise here. There were calls in this game, calls that directly contributed to Clark's foul trouble, that were at minimum highly questionable. The broadcast announced themselves were uncomfortable with at least one of them. When the people being paid to call a game neutrally on television say they did not love a call, that is as close to an official acknowledgement of a bad call as you are going to get in a live broadcast setting. And here is the part that makes Stephanie White doubly culpable. When those calls were happening, when Clark was picking up fouls on contact that did not look like fouls, right there in front of the Indiana bench, Stephanie White had the ability to challenge. Coaches in this league have a challenge. It exists precisely for moments like this. You see a call you believe is wrong. You use your challenge. You protect your best player from foul trouble that is going to cost you the game. Stephanie White did not challenge a single call on Caitlin Clark, not one. The fouls piled up, Clark's foul count climbed, and Stephanie White sat there on the sideline and watched it happen without using the one tool the league gives her to fight back. That is not a coaching philosophy. That is negligence. That is a head coach either not paying attention to what is happening to her best player, or, and I want you to sit with this possibility, not caring enough to protect her. Either explanation is disqualifying. Either explanation is a reason this woman should not be the head coach of this franchise. Now I want to turn to the other villain in this story, because as bad as Stephanie White is, and she is bad, she is genuinely bad at this job. The person who is arguably more responsible for what we watched in Atlanta is Amber Cox. Amber Cox is the general manager of the Indiana Fever. She is the person who built this roster. And I want to talk about the specific brutal reality of what that roster looks like, because it is one of the most catastrophic failures of roster construction that we have seen in recent WNBA history, especially given the resources that were available. Here is the context that makes this unforgivable. Going into this offseason, approximately 80% of the WNBA was available in free agency. 80%. That is an extraordinary, almost unprecedented level of roster availability. Amber Cox had the ability to go out and acquire legitimate, proven, impactful players to build around Caitlin Clark. She had options. She had choices. She had the entire landscape of WNBA talent to draw from. And this is what she came up with. Monique Billings was the centerpiece of Indiana's offseason acquisition strategy. Monique Billings, who based on what we watched in this game, cannot be played in the fourth quarter of a close game. She is unplayable in crunch time. And because Monique Billings cannot play in the fourth quarter, Stephanie White had to go to Michaela Timpson in a critical late-game situation instead. Timpson made some mistakes, including a pass to Aaliyah Boston that had no business being thrown. But I am not going to sit here and bury Michaela Timpson for being in a situation she should never have been in. Monique Billings is supposed to be in that game. Amber Cox paid her. Amber Cox chose her over whatever other free agents were available. And now she is not playable in the moments that matter most. That is on Amber Cox. Full stop. And it does not stop with Billings. The Fever drafted Raven Johnson with the 9th overall pick. 9th overall. That is a top 10 pick. That is supposed to be a foundational piece of this franchise's future. Raven Johnson played 3 minutes in this game. 3. She was so unready for the moment that her shot attempts were not even in the vicinity of the basket. That is not an exaggeration. The description of her layup attempt suggests a player who is nowhere near WNBA ready right now. A 9th overall pick playing 3 ineffective minutes is a draft indictment. And then there is Ty Harris. I want to be careful here because I am going to say something that sounds harsh, but is rooted in what the evidence shows. Ty Harris had to play 15 minutes in this game because the Indiana Fever do not have enough functional players to avoid it. 15 minutes for a player who is not at the level required to contribute meaningfully in a WNBA game. That is not Ty Harris's fault. That is Amber Cox's fault for constructing a roster so thin that 15 minutes of Ty Harris is what you are turning to in a game that matters. Sophie Cunningham made every shot she attempted in the first quarter. She was locked in, she was hot, she was contributing, and then did not get another shot until the fourth quarter. That is a coaching failure layered on top of a roster failure. Your hot hand goes cold for 3 quarters because nobody is running plays to get her the ball. This is the environment Amber Cox built and Stephanie White operates in, and it is an absolute catastrophe for Caitlin Clark. Here is the second receipt. and this one is about the roster negligence at its most specific and damning. Listen to exactly what the offseason priority was for this franchise. Monique Billings, the main attraction, the centerpiece of the offseason. The player Amber Cox chose over the rest of the available market when 80% of this league was on the table, and she cannot play in the fourth quarter of a close game. That is the roster decision. That is the judgment call. That is what Amber Cox decided this franchise needed. Let that sink in for a second. Now let me talk about what Atlanta actually looked like in this game, because I think it is important to understand what the Fever were up against and why the failures of their coaching staff and front office are even more inexcusable in context. Angel Reese led the Atlanta Dream with 21 points and 11 rebounds, a double-double. And here is the thing. Reese was not even at her best in this game. She missed layups, she kept getting her shots tied up for jump balls. She was beatable. She was not dominant. She got to 21 and 11 because she did what she needed to do, but she was not unstoppable. A well-coached team with a functional roster should have been able to manage Angel Reese. Lisa Gray put up 17 points, Jordan Canada put up 18, Ryan Howard put up 16, Naz Hillman put up 17. The entire Atlanta Dream starting lineup finished in double figures, every single starter. That is a coordinated team effort. That is what a well-constructed roster with coherent offensive systems looks like. Every player knew their role. Every player got their shots. Every player contributed. Now compare that to the Indiana Fever, where the best player in the building, the player who went into the fourth quarter with 26 points and 7 assists, did not get a single shot attempt in the fourth quarter. That contrast is the entire story of this game in one sentence. I want to make a series of predictions here, because I think the Fever's situation is about to become a much larger story, and I want to go on record right now about what I believe is coming. First prediction: Stephanie White's job security is going to become a genuine conversation before this season is over. What we watched in Atlanta is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern. Stephanie White has consistently failed to protect Caitlin Clark from foul trouble through challenges. She has consistently failed to draw up plays to get Clark the ball in critical moments. She has consistently failed to manage her rotation in a way that maximizes the talent on the floor. The fourth quarter freeze-out in Atlanta is the most visible example of this pattern. But it is not the only one. At some point, the people who own this franchise are going to have to look at the scoreboard and ask themselves whether Stephanie White is the right person to be making these decisions. Second prediction: the Indiana Fever are going to have a very specific and predictable win-loss pattern for the rest of this season. They are going to beat the teams at the bottom of this league. They will beat the teams that are competing for the #1 overall pick. They will be fine against Connecticut, against Chicago, against the teams that are not legitimate playoff contenders. But when they play a team with a complete functional roster and competent coaching, a team like Atlanta showed itself to be in this game, they are going to lose. Because this roster, as constructed by Amber Cox, is not good enough to compete with the upper tier of this league. The big names on the Fever are real. The talent of Caitlin Clark is real. But talent alone does not win basketball games. Systems win basketball games. Depth wins basketball games. Coaching decisions win basketball games. And on all three of those dimensions, the Indiana Fever are currently failing. Third prediction: the ref situation is not going away. I want to be precise about this because I think it matters. I am not saying there is a coordinated institutional conspiracy against Caitlin Clark. What I am saying is that the officiating in games involving Clark has been at minimum inconsistent in a way that consistently disadvantages her. Calls that would be fouls on other players are not called on Clark. Calls against Clark that are questionable enough that the broadcast team expresses discomfort with them on live television, are not being challenged by her coaching staff. The combination of inconsistent officiating and a head coach who refuses to use her challenge on Clark's behalf is costing this franchise games. That is a structural problem that needs to be addressed, and the league needs to look at it. Fourth prediction: Amber Cox's roster decisions are going to be relitigated loudly and publicly before the season ends. The Monique Billings signing alone, $800,000 a year for a player who cannot play in the fourth quarter of a close game, is going to be a recurring reference point every single time the Fever lose a game in crunch time. And they are going to lose more games in crunch time because the depth is not there, the fourth quarter options are not there, and the coaching is not drawing up plays to put the best players in positions to succeed. Let me say that number one more time: $800,000 a year. That is the contract Amber Cox gave Monique Billings. That is the centerpiece of the offseason, and she is unplayable in the fourth quarter. 80% of the league was available, 80%, and that is the decision that was made. I want to close by talking directly about Caitlin Clark. Because in the middle of all of this, the coaching failures, the roster negligence, the officiating inconsistency, there is a player who is doing everything right. 26 points, 7 assists, 7 rebounds, playing against a dream team whose entire starting lineup finished in double figures, carrying this franchise in Atlanta, on the road, against a legitimately good opponent. Caitlin Clark needs to be more aggressive in the fourth quarter. That is a fair critique. When she gets back on the floor with 3 minutes left, she needs to demand the ball. She needs to impose herself. She needs to be the one forcing the issue even when the coaching staff is not setting it up for her. That is the reality of playing on a team that is not fully built to support you yet. The great ones find a way to take over regardless of the system around them, and Clark is going to have to do that more as this season progresses. But here is what I want every single person watching this video to understand. Caitlin Clark went into the fourth quarter of a road game against a playoff-caliber opponent with 26 points and 7 assists. She was on her way to a 30-point double-double. She was the best player on the floor, and the people responsible for putting her in a position to finish that game, the head coach, the general manager, the officials, collectively failed her. Stephanie White benched her too long, brought her back too late, and drew up nothing for her. Amber Cox built a roster so thin that Stephanie White's options in crunch time were already severely limited. The officials called fouls on Clark that were questionable while swallowing whistles on contact against her, and the coaching staff did not challenge a single one. That is not on Caitlin Clark. That is on the infrastructure around her. And the Indiana Fever are running out of time to fix it before this season becomes a genuine disaster. Caitlin Clark right now today is doing her job. She is showing up, she is putting up the numbers, she is competing. The people who are supposed to be building something around her are the ones who are failing. And until that changes, until Stephanie White starts coaching like a head coach who understands what she has, until Amber Cox starts making personnel decisions that actually support this franchise's best player, until the officiating is applied with even the most basic consistency, the Fever are going to keep losing games they should be winning, and Caitlin Clark is going to keep leaving points and wins on the table that she earned and was robbed of. Here is the forced choice I want you to answer in the comments right now. And I want a real answer, not a vague one. Is Stephanie White the primary problem with the Indiana Fever, or is Amber Cox's roster construction the deeper issue that no coaching change can fix? One or the other, pick one. Make your case, because both of these women are failing Caitlin Clark in real time, and the conversation about which failure is more catastrophic needs to happen right now. Drop it in the comments, tell me where you stand. If this video gave you something to think about, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach the people who need to see it. Subscribe to Rimrun if you are not already here, and make sure you hit that bell notification so you do not miss the next time we have to have this conversation. Because with this Fever roster, this coaching staff, and this officiating situation, there will absolutely be a next time. We will see you then.